I think today is going to be perfect, I said to myself as I fixed my shirt in the mirror. My phone buzzed. It was Emily. Are you coming over early today? She texted. I smiled and typed back. Maybe. I have a surprise for you. She replied quickly. Don't you dare. I'm not ready for surprises. I laughed softly. Too late. I grabbed my keys and walked out. My brother Daniel was sitting in the living room. Going out again? He asked. Just work stuff, I said. He nodded slowly. You've been working a lot lately. I need to build my future, I replied. He looked away. Future, huh? I paused. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, he said quickly. Forget it. I left the house feeling a small sting in my chest. On the drive, I called Liam. Bro, you sound happy, Liam said. I am, I replied. Everything's finally going right. Careful with that, he joked. Life hears you. I laughed. Don't start that nonsense. When I reached Emily's apartment, I parked a little far so she wouldn't see me. I texted her. Open the door. I'm outside. No. Go away. She replied instantly. Too late, I said. I walked up anyway. I muttered. This is going to be a good surprise. Inside, I could hear music faintly. I knocked. Emily? I called. She opened the door slightly. Ethan, I told you not to come. I smiled. I brought food. You are impossible, she said. But she was smiling too. I stepped inside. Where's your phone? You're hiding it again. She froze. What? Your phone? I repeated. She grabbed it quickly. You're acting weird. I stared at her. Am I? She walked past me. Yes, you are. I sat on the couch, trying to ignore the feeling in my stomach. My phone buzzed again. Daniel had texted, When are you coming home? I typed back, Late. Emily came back with drinks. You look tired, she said. I'm fine, I replied. She sat next to me. Do you trust me? I hesitated. Of course. She smiled. Good. But something in her eyes didn't feel right. I forced a smile. Emily? Are you hiding something? She laughed. Like what? I don't know, I said. Just, something feels off. She leaned closer. You're imagining things again. I looked at her for a long moment. Maybe, I whispered. My phone buzzed again. A message preview popped up on her table. I saw a name I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. I asked softly, Who is that? She grabbed the phone fast. No one. I stood up slowly. Emily. She sighed. Ethan. Stop overthinking everything. I nodded, but inside something cracked slightly. I said, I should go. She grabbed my hand. Don't leave like that. I looked at her. Then tell me the truth. Silence filled the room. And for the first time, she didn't answer. I finally walked out of her apartment without waiting for another excuse. Ethan, she called behind me. I stopped at the stairs but didn't turn. Are you seriously leaving like this? She said. I replied, I don't know how else to leave. She lowered her voice. You're being unfair. I let out a shaky laugh. Unfair? I came here to surprise you, Emily. Silence again. Then she said, Just go home. We'll talk later. I nodded even though she couldn't see it. Yeah, later. I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel. My phone rang. It was Liam. Hey, he said. You okay? No, I answered honestly. What happened? I don't know, I said. Something felt wrong. Like she was hiding something. Liam sighed. Bro, did you ask her directly? I did, I said. She just avoided it. There was a pause. Listen, Liam said carefully. Don't destroy your peace over thoughts. You just said life was perfect yesterday. I know, I whispered. But today doesn't feel perfect anymore. When I reached home, Daniel was still in the living room. You're back early, he said. I dropped my keys on the table. Yeah. He looked at me. Everything okay? I laughed without humor. Do you ever feel like you don't really know someone? He went quiet. What happened? he asked again. I shook my head. Nothing. Forget it. He stood up slowly. Ethan, you look different. I snapped. Everyone keeps saying that. He stepped back. I'm just asking. I rubbed my face. Sorry. I'm just tired. He nodded. Maybe you should rest. I walked toward my room but stopped. Daniel, I said. Yeah. Would you ever lie to me? His face changed slightly. Why would you ask that? I don't know, I said. Just answer. He hesitated. No, of course not. I stared at him for a moment. Good, I said quietly and went inside. I sat on my bed and stared at my phone. No message from Emily, just silence. Then a notification popped up again from an unknown number. My heart beat faster. I whispered, "What is going on?" And for the first time, I felt like my perfect life had already started breaking without telling me. I lay back and stared at the ceiling thinking about Emily Daniel, and everything I thought I knew. Something inside me whispered that nothing would ever be the same again, and I didn't know whether to trust my heart or fear it anymore now completely. I started noticing changes in Emily after that night. Hey, are you even listening to me? Liam asked. I blinked. Yeah, sorry. I'm here. You're not here, he said. Your mind is somewhere else. I sighed. She just seems busy lately. Liam frowned. Busy or avoiding you? Don't start that, I said quickly. I'm serious, Ethan, he replied. She hides her phone when you come near. I stayed silent. At home, Daniel walked past me without speaking. Daniel, I called. Everything okay? He stopped. Yeah. You're acting weird too, I said. He shook his head. I'm fine. But he didn't look at me. Later I called Emily. She picked up fast. Hey, I'm out. With who? I asked. Chloe, she said. I paused. Chloe Adams? Yes, she replied. Why are you questioning me? I'm not, I said. Just asking. You're always asking now, she snapped. I heard wind in the background. Where are you exactly? I asked again. Stop it, Ethan, she said. Then the call ended. I stared at my phone. She never used to hang up like that. Liam texted me later. Meet me. I went. You look tired, he said. I didn't sleep, I replied. Because of her again? I nodded. He leaned forward. Ethan, I saw something yesterday. My heart tightened. What? I saw Emily's car near Riverside Street, he said. I frowned. She said she was with Chloe. Then someone is lying, Liam said. I rubbed my face. Maybe I'm just imagining things. Liam grabbed my shoulder. You're not. At home, Daniel avoided me again. Where were you last night? I asked him. Out, he said. With who? I pushed. Friends, he replied quickly. You're both acting strange, I whispered. He looked at me sharply. Both. I froze. Forget it. That night, I checked Emily's social media. No posts. No location. No replies. I whispered. Why does everything feel empty now? My phone buzzed. Unknown message. You are being watched. My hands shook. Who is this? I typed. No reply. I went to Liam the next morning. You look worse, he said. I didn't sleep, I replied. Again because of Emily? He asked. I nodded. Listen, Ethan, you need proof, not fear, he said. I don't even know her anymore, I said quietly. Liam exhaled. That's serious. I saw her near West Bridge Cafe yesterday, I added. She said she wasn't there, I said. Liam shook his head. That's not normal, I whispered. I feel like I'm losing her. He said, don't jump to conclusions. But everything is pointing there, I replied. At home, Daniel stood in the kitchen. Did you see Emily recently? I asked. He hesitated. Not really. Why? He asked. No reason, I said. You look nervous, he said. I'm fine, I said quickly. Everyone keeps saying that, he muttered. I went to my room and checked my phone again. Another unknown message. Stop looking. My breath stopped. What is happening? I called Emily again. Stop calling me, she said immediately. Where are you? I asked. I told you I'm busy, she snapped. With Chloe again? I asked. Silence. Answer me, I said. Don't control me, Ethan, she said. I'm not controlling you, I replied. I just want honesty. Then trust me, she said. I am trying, I whispered. I sat alone for hours. Everything I believed felt fake. Even Daniel felt like a stranger. My phone buzzed again. You are being watched. My hands shook. Who is this? No reply. I decided I needed answers tonight, I told Liam. He nodded. I'm coming with you. I don't trust my own thoughts anymore, I said. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Liam grabbed my shoulder. Stay calm. Whatever is happening, we face it together. I nodded, terrified. I walked outside with Liam that night. The air felt colder. Do you think she is cheating? I asked quietly. Liam hesitated. I don't know. But prepare yourself, he said. My stomach dropped. If it's true, I don't know what I'll do, I said. We handle it step by step, Liam replied. I nodded slowly. I feel like my life is splitting in two. My phone buzzed again. Emily's name appeared. I answered immediately. Where are you? She asked. Outside, I said. With Liam? She asked. Yes. Why are you acting like this? She said. I think you know why, I replied. Silence. Please stop, she whispered. I can't, I said. I need truth now. Long pause. Then you will hate me, she whispered. My heart froze. What do you mean? I asked. No answer. Call ended. I stood staring at my phone. Nothing will be the same anymore. I looked at Liam. We're already in it, he said. Then we face it together no matter what happens. I nodded, feeling fear and truth collide inside me for the first time in my life. Nothing could stop this now. I walked into the kitchen and saw Daniel avoiding my eyes. Daniel, we need to talk, I said. He didn't respond. My father, Robert Carter, looked up from his chair and said, What's going on now? I said, Something is wrong with Emily. Robert said, You're overthinking again, Ethan. I shook my head and said, No, I'm not. Daniel finally said, You always assume things. I stepped closer and said, Then explain why she lies. Silence filled the room. Liam texted me, Meet me outside. I left the house. Liam said, You look worse every day. I said, She's hiding something. Liam said, Or you're imagining it. I said, You didn't see how she acted. He sighed and said, What exactly happened? I said, She laughed when I asked about her phone. Liam frowned and said, That's not good. I said, And Daniel avoids me completely. Liam said, That's even worse. I said, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Liam said, You're stressed, Ethan. I said, No, something is happening. I said, I saw her near West Bridge Cafe. Liam said, Did you ask her? I said, She denied it. Liam said, Then we need proof. I nodded and said, I can't sleep. Liam said, Then we follow her. I paused and said, You think it's that serious? Liam said, I think you're being lied to. I whispered, I don't know who to trust. I went back home and saw Daniel leaving the house. I said, Where are you going? He said, Out. I said, At this time. He said, Don't start. I said, You're hiding something too. He stopped and said, Leave me alone. I felt something break inside me. I went to Emily's social media and saw nothing. I said, This is getting worse. My phone buzzed. You are being watched. I froze. I whispered, Who is this? No reply. I called Emily. She answered and said, What now? I said, We need to talk. She said, I'm busy. I said, This is important. She said, You're always making things dramatic. I said, Are you hiding something from me? Silence. She said, Stop accusing me. I said, Just answer me. She said, no. I said, no what? She said, no, I'm not cheating. I said, then prove it. She said, I don't have to. I said, Emily, please. She said, you're suffocating me. I said, I'm trying to understand. She said, goodbye, Ethan. Call ended. I stared at my phone. I said, she never used to be like this. Liam texted, follow tonight. I said, I'm ready. I walked outside again. The air felt heavier. Liam met me and said, tonight we find truth. I nodded and said, or we lose everything. Liam said, you're already losing it slowly. I said, then let's end it tonight. We stood in silence. Liam said, do you really want this? I said, I need this. He said, then stay close to me. I nodded and said, I feel like everything is falling apart. Liam said, it already has. I looked at the road and said, I keep thinking about Daniel. Liam said, he knows something. I said, or he's part of it. Liam said, don't jump there yet. I said, everything feels connected. Liam said, that's fear talking. I said, or truth. We started walking. I said, if she is lying, I don't know what I'll do. Liam said, you will survive. I said, not like before. He said, no one does. I stopped walking. I said, why does it hurt this much? Liam said, because you loved honestly. I whispered, I think I was blind. Liam said, maybe not blind, just trusting. I said, trust feels like a mistake now. Liam said, don't let it change you fully. I said, I don't think I have a choice. We reached the corner of the street. I said, if she appears tonight, everything ends here. Liam said, or begins something new. I said, I hope you're right. Wind passed through the street and I said, whatever happens tonight, I need. I came home earlier than usual that night. Liam had told me, follow her schedule, not your emotions. So I did. I stood outside my house for a moment and whispered, maybe I'm wrong about everything. I opened the door, and I froze. Emily was in my living room, in Daniel's arms. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I dropped my keys. They hit the floor too loud. Emily stepped back fast. Ethan, wait. Daniel turned pale. It's not what you think. I said nothing. My ears felt like they were full of water. Emily moved toward me. Please listen. I raised my hand. Don't. My voice shook. Daniel said, bro, calm down. I laughed once. Calm down. Emily cried. We didn't mean for it to happen like this. I stared at them. My chest felt like it was cracking open. I said, how long? Silence. I said again louder, how long? Daniel looked at the floor. Emily whispered, Ethan. I stepped closer. How long have you been lying to me? Daniel finally said, a few months. My vision blurred. I said, while I was working? Emily nodded slowly. I tried to stop it. I laughed again, but it broke halfway. You tried. Daniel said, I didn't plan this. I turned to him. You're my brother. He said, I know. I shouted, and oh, you don't. The walls felt too small. Emily reached for my hand. Please, just listen. Pulled away. Don't touch me. She froze. I looked at both of them. So this is it? My life. Daniel said, we didn't want to hurt you. I stepped back. But you did. Silence filled the room. The clock on the wall ticked too loud. I said, every time I came home, you were here? Emily whispered, sometimes. That word broke something inside me. I nodded slowly. Sometimes. I looked at Daniel. You looked me in the face. He said nothing. I said, you ate at my table. Daniel whispered, I'm sorry. I laughed again, sharper this time. Sorry? Emily started crying harder. Ethan, please. I cut her off. Don't say my name like you still know me. She froze. I felt my hands shaking. I said, was any of it real? Emily said, "Yes, I loved you too." I shook my head. "No, don't do that." Daniel said, "I care about you." I snapped, "You don't stab someone you care about." Silence again. I walked toward the door slowly. Emily said, "Where are you going?" I stopped. I said, "Away from both of you." Daniel stepped forward. "We can fix this." I turned back. "Fix this?" My voice cracked. I said, "What exactly are you fixing?" "My brother holding my girlfriend in my living room." Emily whispered, "We made a mistake." I stared at her. "A mistake?" I pointed between them. "This is not a mistake. This is betrayal." Daniel lowered his head. "I know." I felt something inside me burning. I said, "Do you know what hurts the most?" They didn't answer. I said, "It's not even this moment." I pointed at them. "It's every moment before this that was a lie." Emily broke down. "I didn't want it to end like this." I whispered, "It already ended." Daniel said, "Ethan, we are family." I laughed loudly this time. "Family?" I stepped closer to him. "Family doesn't do this." He stepped back. I turned to Emily. "You said you loved me." She nodded through tears. I said, "Then why does it feel like I was nothing?" No answer. Only crying. I picked up my keys from the floor. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped them again. I said, "Do you know what I feel right now?" Daniel whispered, "Hate." I shook my head. "No." I looked at both of them. "I feel empty." That silence was worse than anything else. Emily said, "Please don't leave like this." I paused at the door. I said, "You should have thought of that before opening it." Daniel said, "We didn't plan to hurt you." I opened the door slowly. I said, "But you did anyway." I stepped outside. Cold air hit my face. Behind me, Emily said, "Ethan, please." I didn't turn back. Daniel called, "We can still talk." I whispered, "There's nothing left to say." I closed the door, and for a second, I stood there just breathing. My hands were shaking. My heart felt gone. I whispered to myself, "So this is what it feels like, to lose everything in one moment." I walked down the street slowly. Every step felt heavier. My phone rang. "Liam." I answered. He said, "Did you see it?" I said, "Yes." Silence on the line. Then he said, "Come to me." I said, "I can't feel anything right now." Liam said, "That's shock." I said, "No." I looked back at the house. Lights still on. I said, "That's the end of me." Liam said softly, "No, Ethan." I whispered, "Something broke inside me, and it's not coming back." I started walking away into the dark, not knowing who I was anymore or what I would become after that night. I walked back to the house the next morning. My hands were still shaking. I stood outside and whispered, "I need answers." I pushed the door open. Emily was sitting in the living room. Daniel stood near the wall. Both of them went silent. Emily said softly, "Ethan." I cut her off. "Don't." Daniel looked at me. "We were waiting for you." I laughed. "Waiting? Like nothing happened." Emily started crying again. "Please, let me explain." I stepped forward. "Then explain." Silence. I said, "I'm listening." Emily wiped her tears. "It started when you were always working." I frowned. "That's your reason?" She shook her head. "I felt alone." I said, "So you chose my brother?" Daniel said quickly, "It wasn't like that at first." I turned to him. "Then what was it like?" He looked down. "It just happened." I snapped, "Nothing just happens." Silence filled the room again. I said, "Do you even hear yourselves?" Emily whispered, "I didn't want to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "But you did it anyway." Daniel said, "I'm sorry, Ethan." I stepped closer. "Sorry doesn't fix this." My chest felt like it was burning. I said, "You were in my house." Emily cried harder. "We never meant for it to go this far." I said, "But it did." I turned away for a second. My voice dropped. "I gave you both trust." Daniel said, "We know." I turned back fast. No, you don't know. The front door opened. My mother, Sarah Carter, walked in. She froze. What is going on? I said nothing. Emily whispered, Mrs. Carter. My mother looked between us. Then she saw Emily crying. Then Daniel's face. She said softly, Ethan, tell me. I said, ask them. Silence. My mother's voice shook. No, this can't be. She sat down slowly. I raised you both, she whispered. Daniel said, Mom, I didn't mean. She raised her hand. Stop. My father, Robert Carter, entered behind her. He looked at all of us and said, Why does it feel like a funeral in here? My mother broke down crying. He stepped forward. Sarah, what happened? She couldn't speak. I said, Ask your son and my girlfriend. My father turned slowly. Emily? Emily couldn't answer. I said, She was with Daniel. My father froze. He said, That's not possible. I said, It is. Silence hit the room like a wall. My father looked at Daniel. Is this true? Daniel nodded slowly. My father closed his eyes. He whispered, God. I said, Now you know. My father said sharply, Both of you out. Emily said, Ethan, please. I said, Don't. She stepped back. Daniel looked at me. I didn't want to lose you as a brother. I said, You already did. My voice didn't shake anymore. It felt empty. My mother said through tears, Ethan, don't do anything you'll regret. I looked at her. I already did. I turned to Emily. You said you loved me. She nodded weakly. I said, Then why does it feel like poison now? She whispered, Because I ruined it. I nodded slowly. Yes, you did. Daniel said, We can fix this. I laughed once. Fix what? Me? Silence again. I said, There is nothing left to fix. I walked to the door. Emily cried, Please don't leave like this. I stopped. I said, You already left me first. Daniel stepped forward. Ethan, wait. I didn't turn back. My father said quietly, Son. I closed my eyes for a second. Then I said, Don't call me that right now. I walked out. The air outside felt heavy. Liam was waiting across the street. He looked at me and said, You found out. I nodded. He said, Come with me. I followed him without speaking. At his place, I sat down. He said, Talk to me. I said, I don't feel like myself anymore. Liam said, That's normal after betrayal. I said, No. I looked at my hands. I feel something changing inside me. Liam said, Like what? I whispered, Like love turned into something else. He said quietly, That's pain turning into anger. I said, It feels worse than anger. Silence filled the room. Liam said, What are you thinking? I said, I don't know yet. But inside me, I knew something had already started. And it wasn't healing. I woke up and didn't feel like the same person anymore. Liam looked at me and said, You didn't sleep again. I said, I don't need sleep. He frowned. That's not you talking. I said, The old me is gone. Silence filled the room. Liam said, Don't say things like that. I replied, It's true. He stepped closer. Ethan, listen to me. I said, I'm done listening. He sighed. That's dangerous. I looked at him. Everything I trusted was dangerous. Liam said softly, Don't let this turn you cold. I said, It already did. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A man said, Ethan Carter? I said, Who is this? He replied, Victor Hale. I frowned. I don't know you. He said, But I know you. I stayed silent. He said, I heard what happened to you. I said, And? He replied, I can help you rebuild your life. Liam grabbed my arm and whispered, Don't trust him. I pulled away and said, Why would you help me? Victor said, Because I see opportunity where others see loss. I said, I'm not interested. He said, You will be. Call ended. Liam said, "That's exactly how traps start." I said, "I don't care anymore." He stared at me. "That's the problem." I stood up. "I'm meeting him." Liam said sharply, "Are you insane?" I said, "Maybe." He said, "This guy is dangerous." I said, "So is my situation." Liam grabbed my shoulder. "Ethan, think." I said, "I've thought enough." I left. At the cafe, Victor Hale was already waiting. He smiled. "You came." I said, "Talk." He said, "Straight to business." I like that. I said, "Why me?" He leaned forward. "Because you've been betrayed." I said, "That doesn't answer anything." He said, "Pain makes people strong or useful." I narrowed my eyes. "Useful for what?" He said, "For rebuilding power." I said, "I don't want power." He smiled. "Everyone does." I said, "I want answers." He said, "Then you need resources." I said, "I don't trust you." He said, "Good. Don't." I paused. "What's the catch?" He said, "Work with me." I laughed once. "On what?" He said, "Business, influence, control." I said, "I'm not that person." He said, "You are now." Silence. I said, "Why me again?" He replied, "Because your pain makes you predictable and powerful." I left without shaking his hand. Liam was waiting outside. He said, "You met him?" I nodded. He said, "And?" I said, "He wants me to work for him." Liam said, "That's manipulation." I said, "Or opportunity." He said, "Ethan." I said, "I need answers more than advice." He looked at me closely. "You're changing." I said, "Good." That night, I started watching Emily's apartment. From a distance. Liam said, "This is not healthy." I said, "I don't care anymore." He said, "What are you trying to prove?" I said, "I want to understand everything." He said, "You already know enough." I said, "No, I don't." I saw Daniel leave the building. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Liam said, "Don't do anything stupid." I said, "I'm not stupid." He said, "You're hurt." I said, "That's worse." Daniel stopped near his car. I whispered, "Look at him." Liam said, "Ethan, stop." I said, "He looks normal." Liam said, "Because life moves on for them." I said, "Not for me." Silence. I said, "I used to trust him." Liam said, "I know." I said, "Now I just watch." He said, "That's not living." I said, "It's surviving." We sat in silence. Then I said, "Victor was right." Liam said, "About what?" I said, "Pain changes everything." He said, "Not always for the better." I said, "I already crossed that line." He looked at me. "What are you going to do next?" I stared at Emily's building. And I said, "I'm going to find out how deep this goes." Liam said quietly, "And after that?" I said, "Then I decide what they deserve." The words shocked even me when I said them. But I didn't take them back. Because something inside me had already stopped being soft. And started becoming something else. I sat across from Liam and said, "We need proof." Liam frowned. "Proof of what exactly?" I said, "Everything." He sighed. "Ethan, this is turning into obsession." I shook my head. "It's clarity." My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A man said, "Ethan Carter?" I said, "Who is this now?" He replied, "Detective Ryan Brooks." I froze. "Why are you calling me?" He said, "I've been reviewing some unusual financial activity." I frowned. "What activity?" He said, "Your brother Daniel Carter." Liam leaned in immediately. "Put him on speaker." I did. The detective continued, "There are transactions linked to a private account connected to Victor Hale." I said, "That doesn't make sense." He said, "It does if someone is being used." Silence. I said, "Used for what?" He replied, I'm still investigating that. Liam whispered, "This is getting bigger." I said, "Why are you telling me this?" Detective Brooks said, "Because your name is also tied to the case." My stomach tightened. "What?" he said. "Indirectly. Through shared accounts and transfers." I looked at Liam. "I didn't do anything." Liam said, "We know that." Detective Brooks added, "Someone is using your situation." I said, "Victor." Silence on the line. Then he said, "Be careful with that name." Call ended. Liam said, "I told you." I said, "This is not just betrayal anymore." He nodded. "It's something planned." I stood up. "I need answers from Daniel." Liam grabbed my arm. "Not alone." I said, "I can handle him." He said, "No, you can't anymore." I left anyway. Daniel was outside the apartment building. I walked up slowly. He saw me and froze. "Ethan," I said, "we need to talk." He looked around. "Not here." I said, "Now." We moved aside. He said, "You look different." I said, "You too." He swallowed. "What do you want?" I said, "Truth." He laughed nervously. "About what?" I said, "Victor Hale." His face changed. I stepped closer. "Don't lie." He said, "I don't know him." I said, "That's not what Detective Brooks says." He went silent. I said, "You're involved." He shook his head fast. "No." I said, "Then explain the money transfers." His eyes widened. "What transfers?" I said, "Don't act surprised." He whispered, "I didn't know it was illegal." I froze. "So you did accept something?" He said quickly, "I didn't understand what I was getting into." I said, "You sold me out without knowing?" He said, "I didn't sell you out." I said, "Then what did you do?" Silence. His voice dropped. "Victor helped me with money." I said, "Why?" He said, "I was in debt." I stepped back. "So that's it." He said, "It wasn't supposed to hurt you." I laughed coldly. "But it did." He looked down. "I didn't know he would use Emily too." I stopped. "What did you just say?" He hesitated. "Forget it." I grabbed his collar. "Say it." He shook. He pushed things. My grip tightened. "Explain." He whispered. "Victor told me she was already unstable with you." My mind went blank for a second. I said, "So he watched all of us." Daniel nodded slowly. I let go of him. I stepped back. I said, "This was planned." Daniel said, "I swear I didn't know everything." I said, "You just helped him." He said, "I'm sorry." I laughed again, but it was empty. "Sorry is all you have?" He said nothing. I turned away. Behind me he said, "Ethan, please don't do anything stupid." I stopped. I said, "It's too late for that advice." I walked back to Liam. He looked at my face and said, "You know now." I nodded. "It's bigger than them." Liam said, "Victor is the center." I said, "And I was part of his plan." Liam said, "So what now?" I looked at my phone. Emily's missed calls. I said, "Now I stop reacting." He said, "And start." I said, "Start controlling the outcome." Liam stared at me. "That doesn't sound like you." I said, "That version of me is gone." He said softly, "Ethan." I said, "No more hesitation." I looked at Daniel walking away in the distance. I said, "Everything they did leads back to one person." Liam said, "Victor Hale." I nodded. I said, "Then I go straight to him." Liam grabbed my arm. "That's dangerous." I said, "Everything started dangerous." He said, "You're not thinking clearly." I said, "No." I looked at him. "I'm thinking clearly for the first time." Silence. Then I said, "Now I want the full truth." And for the first time, I didn't feel like the victim anymore. I felt like I was closing in. I stood outside the building and said, "This ends today." Liam looked at me and said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I've never been more sure in my life." We walked in together. Emily was already there. Daniel stood beside her. And Victor Hale sat like he owned everything. Emily saw me and said softly, "Ethan." I held up my hand. "Don't." Daniel stepped forward. "Ethan, please listen." I cut him off. "You listened before. That's the problem." Victor smiled. "So this is the famous Ethan Carter." I stared at him. "You ruined everything." He leaned back. "No. I gave direction." I said, "You manipulated all of us." He shrugged. "People choose what they want." I laughed once. "You planned it." Before he could answer, a voice came from behind. Detective Ryan Brooks said, "Actually, he did." Everyone turned. He walked in with officers. Emily froze. "What is this?" Detective Brooks said, "Victor Hale, you are under arrest for fraud, manipulation, and illegal financial operations." Victor stood slowly. "This is a misunderstanding." The officer stepped forward. Victor said quietly to me, "You think this is over?" I said, "It is for you." They took him away. Silence filled the room. Daniel dropped to his knees. "I didn't know it would become this." I looked at him. "You still did it," he cried. "I destroyed everything." My mother Sarah wasn't there, but I could hear her voice in my head. Emily stepped forward. "Ethan, I'm sorry." I looked at her. No anger, no love, just nothing. She said again, "Please say something." I said, "There's nothing left to say." She started crying harder. "I loved you." I nodded slowly. "I know." She whispered, "Do you hate me?" I paused. Then I said, "No." She looked confused. "Then what do you feel?" I said, "Nothing." That hurt her more than anger ever could. Liam stepped closer to me. "You're done here." I nodded. Daniel said, "Can we ever fix this?" I looked at him, and I said, "No." He broke down completely. Emily whispered, "I lost you." I said quietly, "You lost me a long time ago." Detective Brooks said, "Let's go." Victor was gone. The case was closed. The truth was out. But I didn't feel victory. I just felt quiet. Outside, Liam said, "It's over." I looked at the sky. "No." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I said, "It's just beginning for me." He stayed silent. I walked forward. Liam asked, "Where are you going now?" I said, "Forward." He said, "What about them?" I stopped for a second. I said, "They live with what they did." Liam said softly, "And you?" I looked at my hands. "I rebuild." He said, "The old Ethan?" I said, "He died the day I opened that door." We stood there in silence. Then I said, "But I survived something worse than death." Liam asked, "What's that?" I said, "Betrayal that didn't break me." I turned away, and for the first time, I didn't feel lost anymore.